That punch landed so hard the whole lobby went quiet, like the building itself stopped breathing, and I tasted blood before I even registered pain. Officer Kyle Donovan stood there with his fist still clenched, wearing this smug little grin, like he'd just proved a point to everyone watching. I turned my head back slowly, wiped my lip with my thumb, and smiled at him because in that exact second I realized he'd just handed me everything I came for, on camera in front of witnesses inside his own precinct. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like a movie, but I'm telling you, that morning in the 22nd was as real as the sting in my jaw and the red spot spreading across my white shirt. People ask me all the time why I walked into the so-called zoo like a regular citizen, why I didn't show my credentials up front, why I didn't roll in with an entourage and a press photographer and make everybody snap to attention. And look, I get it if you're watching this thinking, man, I would have never let it go that far. I hear you, I really do. But if you've ever tried to cut rot out of a system, you learn fast that the rot doesn't show up during inspections. It doesn't show up when people know they're being watched by the boss. It shows up in the quiet moments, in the everyday moments when someone thinks they can get away with treating a stranger like trash. That's the only reason I went in alone, dressed plain, no badge on my belt, no important person aura, just a black man in a clean shirt walking into a precinct asking for help like everybody's supposed to be able to do. My name is Julian Hayes, and 3 weeks before that morning I'd accepted the job as the city's new chief of police brought in because the department was bleeding trust and the 22nd precinct was ground zero. They didn't just have the most complaints, they had the most use of force incidents, the lowest clearance rates, and this reputation that hung over them like a dirty ceiling tile, the kind of place other cops joked about but residents didn't laugh at. I'd read the reports, the lawsuit summaries, the internal memos that tried to sound neutral while describing things that weren't neutral at all, and I kept thinking numbers don't tell you what it feels like, what it smells like, what it sounds like when power gets bored and starts entertaining itself. So I decided to feel it for myself, and yeah, I chose a pretext that was small on purpose. I'd moved into a modest brownstone 2 weeks earlier, and for 3 nights in a row, right between 2 and 3 in the morning, somebody had thrown rocks at my bedroom window. Not enough to break it, just enough to make sure I woke up with my heart in my throat, staring into the dark, wondering who wanted me unsettled in my own home. Harassment like that is exactly the kind of thing a decent precinct should document without attitude, because patterns start small and then they grow teeth. But it's also the kind of complaint a bad precinct uses as an excuse to mock you, to test you, to see if you'll shrink. That morning I walked into the 22nd and the air hit me like a wet rag, stale coffee, industrial disinfectant, that faint metallic tang that always shows up in buildings where too many people have cried and nobody cared. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that tired yellow-green. The floors scuffed the walls, battleship gray, the lobby chairs bolted down like the place didn't trust you to sit comfortably, and behind thick bulletproof glass, 2 officers sat at the reception desk like the public was an inconvenience. There were a handful of civilians scattered around a young woman clutching a domestic violence pamphlet like it was a life raft, an older man staring at the wall with the kind of emptiness you only get after you've asked for help too many times, and I remember thinking, this is the waiting room for hope to die. I walked up to the counter and waited, hands at my sides, calm, patient, because I knew the first test was always time. It's subtle, but it's loud. It says my time matters, yours doesn't. A minute passed, then 2, then 3, and the younger officer never looked up from his phone. The older sergeant typed with 2 fingers like he was writing a resignation letter, 1 keystroke at a time. I didn't tap the glass, didn't clear my throat. I just stood there and watched the machine run the way it runs when it thinks nobody important is watching. Finally, the younger one looked up with irritation like I'd interrupted him mid-sentence. His name tag read K. Donovan. Late 20s, tight haircut, that restless, pale-eyed stare that always seems to be searching for someone to dominate. He sighed dramatically like a performance and said, help you with something, but it wasn't help. It was justify your existence. I said, yes, I'd like to file a report. And I kept my voice even because I've interviewed hundreds of officers in my career. I know exactly how some of them fish for a reaction. Donovan leaned back, let his eyes travel over me slowly, shoes to face like he was appraising a used car. Crisp white shirt, tailored slacks, clean shoes, calm posture, and you could practically see his brain trying to force me into one of his little boxes. Black man dressed like this in this neighborhood in his worldview meant I had to be either dirty money pretending to be clean, or a lawsuit looking for a payday, or a liar trying to act important. The The simplest possibility that I was a citizen asking for a service I pay for never even entered the room. He smirked and said, "A report, huh? What is it? Somebody steal your fancy watch then?" He glanced at the older sergeant like they were sharing a joke. The sergeant didn't even look up. That part hit me harder than the joke because mockery is one thing, but silence is the glue that holds a bad culture together. I said, "It's harassment. Someone's been throwing rocks at my house in the middle of the night at my bedroom window 3 nights in a row," and Donovan blinked like I'd asked him to investigate a ghost. He repeated rocks flat and amused, then leaned forward and said in that conspiratorial tone that's really just disrespect dressed as friendliness, "Listen, pal, this is the 22nd. We deal with real crime. You're wasting my time because some kids are messing with the new guy." New guy. That one phrase told me he'd already made assumptions, already decided I didn't belong. I stayed calm anyway because calm is a mirror and some people hate what they see in it. I said I'd like to file a report, and he tried to steamroll me with sarcasm. "You want me to put out an APB for kids with rocks? You want CSI to come dust your window for prints? This isn't TV." I told him, "It's my understanding it's your duty to take a report from any citizen who wishes to make one regardless of how minor you perceive it to be. Is that no longer policy?" And the second I used the word policy, his jaw tightened. Because now it wasn't about rocks, it was about his obligations, and being reminded of obligations by a civilian made him feel small. He snapped, "I know policy louder now. I'm telling you, there's nothing to report. Buy thicker curtains." The older sergeant glanced up just long enough for his eyes to meet mine, and there was this flicker, not sympathy, more like exhausted recognition, like he knew exactly what was happening and was choosing for his own comfort to let it happen anyway. Then he looked away. That choice, that quiet choice, was a brick in the wall. I said, "With all due respect, officer, I'm not asking for advice. I'm exercising my right to file a formal complaint. 3 nights in a row at the same time suggests a pattern." Donovan scoffed. "Pattern, huh? You think you're that important?" And then he hit me with the line that's always the line, the question that says everything without saying it. "Who do you think you are?" I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "I'm a citizen and you work for the public. If you can't take the report, direct me to someone who can, or give me the form so I can fill it out. Reasonable, polite, procedural, impossible to refuse without admitting you're not doing your job." And that's what made him furious. Because he didn't want to do his job, he wanted to control the interaction. The lobby was watching now, you could feel it. The young woman with the pamphlet staring, the older man sitting up straighter, even 2 uniformed officers near the doorway slowing down to see the show. Donovan felt those eyes, and instead of calming him down, it turned his ego into gasoline. He lied. "There is no form," and when I asked very clearly, "Are you officially refusing to take my report of harassment?" that word officially made him flinch. I watched the calculation run behind his eyes because official is the word that turns a power trip into a record. He leaned in predator close and hissed, "You got a smart mouth. You come in here acting like you own the place, quoting policy at me." I said, "I'm trying to understand the process. If the process is citizens are denied the ability to report a crime, I'd like that clarified for my own understanding." And yeah, I knew how that sounded, that calm razor politeness that points out the absurdity without raising your voice. It's like holding up a flashlight and watching roaches scatter. Donovan's face went blotchy red. He started yelling now so everyone could hear. "All right, let me explain how this works. When you come into my house, you show respect. You don't come in here with an attitude. People like you think you're entitled. People like you." There it was, coded enough for plausible deniability, clear enough for everybody with ears. Inside me, something cold settled into place. Not panic, not anger, yet just certainty. This was the disease I'd come to diagnose. I said low and steady, "The only thing I'm entitled to in this building is the service I pay for. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't threatened you. I've asked questions. If you hear calm questions as disrespect, maybe the issue isn't my attitude. Maybe it's your interpretation." That was the moment the room braced. The woman with the pamphlet flinched like she expected him to explode. Even Sergeant Miller's fingers paused over the keyboard. Donovan sputtered, pointed at me. "You're being disruptive. You're interfering with police business. One last chance, walk out before you find yourself in trouble." I said I will not be leaving until I file my report. If you're going to arrest me for lawfully requesting service in a public building, proceed. But I suspect your captain might have questions. Mentioning the chain of command was an outer ramp down a chance for him to save face by doing the right thing. He didn't take it. Pride is a trap, and he was already in it. The magnetic lock clicked sharp as a period at the end of a sentence, and Donovan stepped out from behind the desk, closing the distance until he was right in my space, chest-puffed, feet planted wide. 2 other officers drifted closer, not to intervene, to flank. He growled, "I told you to leave. You deaf, I said I heard you. I'm standing on public property breaking no laws. You have no legal grounds to order me to leave." His eyes went hard. "I am the legal grounds," he spat. "This uniform is all the grounds I need." I glanced just for a second at the phone lens I noticed in the woman's hands, blinking red, and I thought, good, because I knew what was coming. The shove was sudden and brutal, his whole body slamming into me like he wanted to knock dignity out of my spine. The lobby gasped. I absorbed it, feet barely sliding, and I didn't stumble. That made him look weak, and nothing makes a bully angrier than looking weak. He shoved me again, harder, snarling. "You think you're tough," I said. "Calm, I am not resisting. You are assaulting me." I didn't yell it. I stated it, a fact meant for the witnesses, for the cameras, for the record that was being created, whether he liked it or not. His face twisted into something ugly. He drew back his arm and swung a wild hook full of rage and hate, and the punch landed with this wet crack that sucked all the air out of the room. My head snapped sideways, blood and saliva spraying, and I took one step to regain balance. For a heartbeat, Donovan looked triumphant, like he'd finally gotten the reaction he wanted. Then he felt the silence. Not submission, not fear, witness, judgment. He panicked and yelled, "He's resisting." He resisted arrest, even though, I hadn't been under arrest for anything until he needed a story. He grabbed me and with Officer Peterson's help slammed me face first into the wall. The crowd gasped again. The pat-down that followed wasn't law enforcement, it was desperation. Donovan was searching for an alibi, for a weapon, for drugs, for anything that would make his violence look justified in hindsight. He yanked my wallet, flipped through cash and cards like they were proof of guilt. Then he found it, the heavy, ornate captain's badge from my last job, tucked into a sleeve with an ID card. He held it up like a trophy and crowed, "Well, well, well. Playing cop. Impersonating an officer is a felony." His prejudice did the rest. It made it impossible for him to consider the simple truth that a black man could legitimately have credentials, could legitimately know procedure, could legitimately stand there unafraid. He dangled the badge near my face and sneered. "I knew something was wrong with you from the start." I stayed silent for a beat, letting him talk, because every word he said was another nail. Then I said, muffled by the wall, but crystal clear, "Officer Donovan, you are violating the Fourth Amendment. You have committed felony assault. You are attempting to fabricate a report under color of law, and it's being witnessed and recorded by civilians and your own surveillance systems." That technical language hit Peterson like a cold wave. I watched his hands loosen for half a second, watched the fear creep into his eyes, because some part of him knew those weren't empty words. Donovan tried to bluster through it. "You can quote whatever you want. You're a criminal trying to intimidate me." I turned my head slightly, looked him dead in the eyes and said, "No, officer. I'm not intimidating you. I'm informing you of your new reality." And right then a voice cut through the lobby, crisp and steel-edged, the kind of voice that makes officers stand up straighter without thinking. "Donovan," it said, "what in God's name is going on in my lobby?" Captain Isabella Rossi had arrived, and she took in the scene like she'd been punched in the gut. Bleeding man on the wall, terrified civilians, phone recording badge in Donovan's hand, officers standing around like furniture. Donovan launched into his lie fast and rehearsed. "Captain, we have it under control. He got aggressive, assaulted me. We found he was impersonating a captain." Rossi's eyes flicked from Donovan's unmarked face to my split lip and swelling jaw, and you could see her instincts screaming. Then she looked at the badge, and something in her expression changed, because she recognized the design, she recognized where it came from, and she knew, because she'd been preparing for the new chief's arrival for weeks, that the new chief was coming from that exact agency. Her blood went cold. She stepped closer, not to Donovan, to me, and her tone shifted from accusation to respect in a way that made the room tilt. "Sir," she said, and that one word detonated Donovan's entire narrative. "I'm Captain Rossi. Can you tell me your name?" I pushed off the wall gently, and Donovan and Peterson, suddenly unsure, let me go. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a clean folded handkerchief, dabbed my lips, slow and deliberate, like time belonged to me now. I looked Rossi in the eye and said, "Captain Rossi, it's a pleasure to finally meet you, though. I have to admit your welcoming committee is a bit more hands-on than I expected. I let that hang for a beat, then I said it clear as a gavel. I'm Julian Hayes, your new chief of police. Our meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. It appears I'm a few minutes early. The silence that followed wasn't normal silence, it was the kind that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on your shoulders. The woman filming lowered her phone slightly, mouth open. The old man's jaw dropped. Captain Rossi's face flashed through disbelief, then comprehension, then pure, unfiltered dread. Peterson looked like he was going to vomit. And Donovan went white, like all the blood drained out of his body at once. He looked at the badge in his hand like it had turned into a snake. Then his fingers opened, and it clattered onto the floor, a metallic sound that felt like a life breaking. In that instant, the calm citizen persona was gone. I didn't have to shout, but my voice changed. It carried command voice, the voice that expects obedience because it's used to being obeyed. Captain Rossi, I said, secure this lobby. It is now a crime scene. No one in or out. Every civilian is a material witness. Collect names, collect videos, preserve surveillance. Rossi snapped into action, professional to her core, even while furious, and she barked orders. Doors locked, internal affairs called, medics requested. I looked at Donovan and Peterson and said, place your hands on top of your heads. Interlock your fingers. Now. Donovan hesitated for a heartbeat, still trying to pretend this wasn't real, and I said sharper, now, and both of them scrambled to comply, clumsy and shaking. I pointed at the officers who'd been watching and said names and badge numbers, suspended pending investigation for failure to intervene. Rossi disarmed Donovan and Peterson's sidearm taser backup pieces, everything bagged as evidence, and the symmetry of it was almost poetic in the ugliest way, the man who'd used his badge like a weapon now being stripped of it piece by piece in front of the same civilians he'd tried to intimidate. As Rossi cuffed Donovan with his own cuffs, I said it for the room, for the record, for every person who'd ever been dismissed behind glass. Officer Kyle Donovan, Officer Michael Peterson, you are under arrest for felony assault, conspiracy to file a false report, and violation of civil rights under color of law. The cuffs clicked, and that sound was clean, final, satisfying in a way that surprised even me, because it wasn't joy, it was relief, like the truth finally had weight. Now here's the part that still keeps people arguing, and I want you to argue too, because this matters more than my bruised lip. Some folks said I was reckless for walking in like that I should have announced myself the second Donovan started running his mouth, that no reform is worth taking a punch. Others said the only reason anything changed is because I let the culture reveal itself in daylight, because if I'd flashed my badge early, Donovan would have snapped into fake professionalism and gone right back to being who he is the second I walked out. And every time I hear that debate, I think about the woman with the pamphlet filming with trembling hands. I think about the old man who looked like he'd given up on being treated like a human a long time ago. And I wonder how many people got shoved, threatened, humiliated, or worse in that same lobby when the person on the wall wasn't the new chief of police, when there wasn't a captain walking in at the right moment, when there wasn't a phone recording. So I'll ask you straight, was I right to do it this way, to take the risk so the truth could be undeniable? Or was it wrong because any leader should prevent harm first, even if it means you don't catch the rot on camera? And if you've ever watched someone abuse authority, or you've been on the receiving end of that cold glass and silence treatment, what did you do? What did you wish you'd done? Drop your story in the comments. Tell me where you stand on this hit. Like if you believe accountability matters more than ego, and subscribe if you want more real-world stories where the power dynamic flips and the truth finally gets a microphone.